The ridge rose in layers of dust and wind, cut against the early light like the spine of some old, tired machine. The wind moved low and steady, brushing grit against boots and scopes, humming around the plastic legs of tripods and drone packs. Cassie stepped lightly across the hard-packed earth, her shadow long behind her as the first outlines of the team came into view. She moved without announcement. No greeting, no chatter, no need for either. She carried her rifle slung low, bolt action and matte gray, with its suppressor wrapped in faded tape and its scope adjusted manually the night before. In one side pocket was a laminated range card, hand-drawn with clean lines and corner-folded from use. In the other, a soft-bound logbook marked with pencil. No screen, no cables. The team had arrived earlier, and it showed. They were younger, sharper in silhouette, faces turned toward their tablets and feed screens, gear molded around them like it belonged there. One drone operator adjusted his visor while calling out wind metrics from a real-time uplink. Another set a sat-map overlay to sweep the valley in 10-minute loops. A third, with a fresh buzz cut and an open vest, laughed as he pointed toward a spike in thermal bloom 2 kilometers out. It was performative, not sloppy. They were competent. They were also convinced she wasn't necessary. Sergeant Rhodes, broad-chested and confident in a way that gathered attention even when unearned, looked up from the mission screen as Cassie moved to the edge of the line. He nodded once, then turned away. "Cassie, you're on wind calls only. Just feed me vectors. Don't touch the trigger unless I say." His tone wasn't sharp, just automatic. The voice of someone who didn't expect to be questioned. Cassie said nothing. She unrolled her mat at the edge of the outcrop and lay prone, adjusting the toe of her boot against a small depression in the stone. Her fingers moved through the same setup sequence she had repeated for years. Anchor elbow, center optic, confirm, can't. She took a slow breath as the wind traced along her left sleeve. It had shifted 0.6 meters per second since she arrived. Behind her, one of the operators chuckled. "She brought the museum piece," he said, nodding toward the bolt-action rifle. "What's the 0 on that World War II?" Another added, "She probably logs her shots in cursive." They laughed, soft but pointed. Cassie didn't respond. She opened her logbook, pressed it flat, and began noting wind shifts by hand. No need for a retort. No room for one, either. The ridge overlooked a staggered set of canyons, each one dark at the base and etched with sparse scrub. The HVT convoy, according to satellite markers, would approach from the northeast and funnel through one of 3 known routes before reaching the drop point. The team had already built predictive overlays. Cassie listened to their discussion quietly, eyes on her own map. She marked elevation angles beside each canyon mouth. One, near the south face, bent in tighter than the others, and lacked full sensor coverage. She circled it once in pencil. The wind picked up again, steady now at 3.7 meters per second. She noted the vector on the edge of her range card and watched the low dust move in swirls along the ridgeline. While the others adjusted for visual range, she drew a simple arc across the laminated card. A possible deflection, if needed. Rhodes called out fire sector assignments. None of them included her. Cassie leaned into her scope and rechecked her math. She could see where the blind spot fell across the canyon base. It wasn't wide, but it was just long enough for someone to vanish. One operator asked if they should send another drone. Rhodes shook his head. "We're covered. If something moves, we'll know." The confidence was rehearsed. It always was before the waiting began. Cassie didn't object. She set her cheek into the stock, adjusted the scope dial manually, and waited. The wind settled again, then paused, then shifted. She logged that too. Not a single member of the team had asked her for input. Not one had looked at her range card or asked what terrain line she had marked. She didn't expect them to. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here to watch. And watching, she did. The alert came mid-transmission. A clipped report from aerial surveillance as the lead vehicle in the convoy approached the southern canyon fork. The HVT vehicle, a matte black armored transport, suddenly veered off the primary route and turned sharply into a narrower canyon on the southeast edge of the ridgeline. The camera feed stuttered once, then lost clarity as the drone repositioned above a thick band of foliage. The valley floor disappeared into shadow. Lost visual, someone called reacquiring now. Cassie had already shifted. The moment the truck altered its angle, she adjusted her cheek weld, recalibrated for the bend in the canyon, and checked wind direction. The shift had come fast, but not without warning. The pattern of dust trailing the lead vehicle had broken slightly. The heat signature had dipped, and the driver had slowed not enough for anyone watching a screen to panic, but enough for her to notice. She rolled her dial back 2 clicks, lowered her breathing, and found the edge of the foliage gap that might, just barely, allow a round through. Rhodes didn't issue an intercept. He hesitated, waiting on confirmation. The drone was still circling to reacquire. The command tent hadn't responded. Cassie didn't ask for clearance. She didn't raise her voice. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger once. The suppressed report barely registered to anyone beyond a few meters. A puff of dust lifted off a low branch at the canyon's entrance. Nothing moved in the shadow below. Rhodes looked over with a mix of irritation and amusement. What was that? Cassie? He asked. Throwing rocks now. Cassie kept her eye on the scope for a few more seconds. No movement, no confirmation. The vehicle had disappeared entirely behind brush and terrain. You missed someone added from the telemetry bench. Hope the bushes felt it. The laughter wasn't harsh, but it was collective. A kind of default amusement meant to lighten the unknown. Cassie made no reply. She opened her logbook with her offhand, pencil already positioned along the margin, and marked the time. 11:46. Wind at 3.4 meters per second. Barrel temperature steady. Canyon marked as southeast 2. Rhodes shook his head and turned back to the feed. We'll pick it up again on the far side, he said. Next time. Wait for visual. The drone was still searching. A new feed opened with a satellite image, already outdated by 15 seconds. The terrain map updated with a faint blue prediction arc, estimating where the HVT might emerge on the next elevation rise. The team began shifting equipment to a new observation point down the ridge, folding tripods, calling updates across the channel. No one looked at Cassie. She reached down, ejected the spent casing, and let it rest on the cloth inside her case. Her scope cover snapped gently into place. She folded the laminated range card back along its creased edge and tucked it beneath the logbook. The round she had fired had left the barrel clean, on breath, and exactly where she intended it to go. She had seen the curvature in the wind, the way it ducked between the rock face and the slope. The entry gap had been no wider than a milk jug, and the shot had gone into it like water finding a drain. Whether anyone else noticed didn't change the path. As the team loaded into the rover, the mission logs still listed her contribution as null. Rhodes patted the side of the vehicle and called back, "We'll get 'em on the next loop." Cassie slid her rifle case into the side compartment, secured the latch, and stepped into the back seat without comment. One of the operators nudged the other, muttering something she didn't hear. The dust kicked up behind them as the wheels rolled over stone. Cassie looked back once. The canyon was still, the brush unmoved, the shadow long and dark. She watched it for exactly 5 seconds, then turned forward and closed her logbook. The sun was still high when the team returned to base, but the heat had lost its edge, softened by wind rolling over the scrub flats and the canvas flaps of the outpost. Cassie stepped down from the vehicle last. The others peeled off quickly, heading for the mess tent or the charging stations where gear blinked to life with quiet chimes. She moved instead toward the far side of the camp, where the tents stood spaced and facing west, their shadows long and thin across the dust. Her cot was nearest the edge, tucked between a gear rack and the utility drum where wash water was stored. She dropped her rifle case gently beside the entry flap, unhooked her gloves from the strap on her belt, and pulled back the canvas. The inside of the tent was still and warm. No clutter ever. Her bedroll was tight, her maps folded and stacked beneath her gear panel, her logbook resting open at the foot of her cot beside a pencil clipped to the binding. One photo lay inside the flap pocket, partway hidden under a folded sandbag. In it, she stood younger, thinner, smiling beside two other marksmen at a sniper school graduation. Her rifle had been different then. Her eyes, too. She didn't reach for the photo. Instead, she unzipped the rifle case and set the weapon across her knees. She moved methodically, wiping down the bolt, checking the tension in the sling, and folding her weather card once along the crease she had reinforced with tape last year. Her hands worked without urgency, practiced but not mechanical. The same motions, the same quiet checks. Every evening she had a moment alone. She logged the conditions: wind shift, barometric change, light pollution near the ridgeline. She noted them, not because anyone asked, but because the rifle required them, because silence demanded record. Dinner came in foil trays, delivered late. Cassie took hers without speaking, nodded once, and walked it back to her tent. She sat cross-legged near the flap and ate without ceremony. No one approached. She heard the laughter of the others drift from the mess area, the clang of trays being stacked, someone recounting a false start from the morning prep. Her name didn't come up. It rarely did. When the sun dropped low enough to stain the far hills in copper, she stepped behind the tent and began her nightly drill. No gear beyond the essentials, no vest, no spotter, just the rifle, the wind, and the frame of her breath. She placed a small crate 10 meters out and knelt into firing position. Dry fire only. Trigger squeeze. Break point. Follow through. One shot. Always one. She logged the imaginary round in her mind, then stepped back and did it again. Not because anyone required it, because presence demanded proof. Years ago, she had stood in a different field, behind a podium, holding a paper no one could erase. Instructor status. Marksman level 3. She taught rookies how to feel for thermals, how to predict pressure bleed from terrain shape. She spent weeks developing training protocols for satellite-aligned smart scopes. One model had a sync delay, subtle, measured in tenths, under normal conditions, invisible, but at long range in crosswind. The delay bent shots just off target. She flagged it. Her report was read but not acted on. Her note in the system was overwritten by procurement. The software was deployed, and 1 month later, a hostage op in an eastern valley failed. The round hit 2 feet off. The target escaped. The lead claimed bad wind. Cassie knew better. The after-action review was closed under classification. Her name was not mentioned, but the week after, her role shifted from instructor to observer. No warning, no hearing, just a new assignment, a smaller desk, and a field packet with her badge code moved from strategic personnel to rotational support. She never filed a complaint. She stopped waiting to be asked. She started logging everything herself. Inside her tent, she unrolled a narrow field cloth and set a single brass casing at its center, not fired, not perfect, but clean. She wrapped it and tucked it back into her gear pack, not as keepsake, as anchor. Her maps stayed folded under the cot, weighted by a flat rock from her first assignment in Arizona. She had marked the corners with notches where elevation intersected with shadowfall. Her fingers traced the folds out of habit. Each bend in the paper reminded her of what digital charts always missed, how terrain felt. She reached for her logbook. The cover was soft now, the corners worn, but the grid lines inside were precise. Her handwriting didn't wander. Her margins stayed tight. She reviewed her most recent entries, checking wind vectors from the canyon floor, rifle elevation at time of shot, total delay from command call to squeeze. Her pencil tapped the edge of the column as she added one line. Distance estimated 1,100 meters. Entry point unknown. Round confirmed pending. Then she drew a box and left it blank. She stared at that blank box for a long time, then closed the book. She did not expect anyone to fill it for her. That was never the point. The night came slower on the ridge than in the city. No glow on the horizon, no echo off stone. Cassie leaned back against the canvas wall, eyes open, listening to the wind. It had shifted again, barely noticeable to anyone not trained to hear it. 3.2 meters per second. From the west. She noted it silently. Tomorrow. They'd run another intercept. The chatter would continue. The gear would hum. She would not be asked to lead, but she would watch. And if needed, she would shoot. And afterward, when the wind calmed and the feed lines went silent, she would write it down. One round, one page, one breath. The UAV control tent was still quiet when the second shift rotated in, most of the operators still nursing half-cold coffee and stretching their backs after a long night of static screens and thermal scrolls. The morning update was routine until the recon drone pinged a static heat anomaly from the lower southeast quadrant of the canyon floor. At first, the feed showed nothing unusual, just rocky outcrop, dust, and a few smears of infrared noise from where the sun had begun to warm the brush. Then, the shape resolved. The black armored transport sat motionless in the clearing, its outline faint but unmistakable. It hadn't moved. It wasn't idling. It just sat there. "Contact reacquired," said the first tech, squinting at the screen. "Grid 8, South Fork. Same vehicle ID. Looks like it stalled out." A second operator leaned in. Why would they stop there? There's no hard cover. No sign of support vehicles. They just parked in the open. The first tech didn't answer. He was already cycling through thermal bands. On infrared, the vehicle's heat profile was strange. The undercarriage showed typical overnight cooling, but the intake region, specifically the engine grill, displayed a heat bloom that didn't match time decay. One frame flared orange, too hot for residual warmth, then immediately fell to black. "That's not standard," he murmured. "That intake lit and died. One frame only." "Could be glitch," someone suggested from behind. The tech shook his head. "Not a glitch. We've got frame continuity. Rewind it 3 seconds." They scrubbed back the footage. A ripple crossed the brush line in the exact moment the engine bloom appeared. A faint flick in the video stream, like heat displaced in air, from the direction of the ridge, from where the team had staged Overwatch the day before. They played it again, slower. The ripple aligned perfectly with the spark in the engine. Then silence. Then nothing. "Bring up telemetry for Cassie's firing position," said the second tech, more curious now than skeptical. Rhodes stepped into the tent just as the team began overlaying the visual trajectory. The arc came in clean. From the ridge. From her sector. Exactly through the tree gap she'd been tracking during setup. "You pulling recon angles?" Rhodes asked, brows narrowed. "I thought that zone was outside blast radius." "It was," replied the tech, eyes still on the feed. "We didn't hit it with drones, but someone did. This thing didn't stall. It was disabled. Shot." There was a pause. Another analyst joined them. Brought up the secondary lens footage, narrow-angle thermal just before the fade. The frame blinked to full resolution. The shot path became visible, if barely. A shift in hot air. A slight line through dust and leaves. "Enhance that," someone said, half whispering. They did. The line tightened. "That's a rifle strike," the analyst said. "One round, precision impact, grill entry." They cross-checked the time signature. 11:46. Same as Cassie's entry in the field log. Rhodes stood still, arms folded. He watched the footage 3 times before speaking. That was her shot. No one answered. The room had gone silent. One of the techs opened the team comms archive. Field log entry from Cassie, listed by hand, 1 round fired, Southeast Canyon, Wind at 3.4 meters per second. Target estimated at 1,100 meters. No visible confirmation at time of shot. The tech leaned back. She hit the engine block through brush with a bolt rifle from over a kilometer. And no digital assist. Another muttered. She had no telemetry. She mapped it by hand. Rhodes said nothing. He stared at the thermal still. The bright white flare of the intake spike, now frozen on screen, gave no ambiguity. That wasn't a natural failure. That wasn't luck. That was placed. Someone went to retrieve her. She arrived 2 minutes later, boots dusted, logbook still clipped to her belt. She didn't ask questions. She stepped into the tent and waited. Rhodes turned toward her. "Cassie, that was your round." She nodded once, not defensive, not proud, just confirmation. He gestured to the screen. "Through that." "Wind bent it clean," she said. The room stayed quiet. There were no cheers, no wide eyes, just the weight of the data now seen clearly. One shot had stopped the escape, one moment that everyone else had written off, and she had never mentioned it since. The analyst toggled the arc overlay again. The trajectory curved slightly, confirming wind vector deviation she had predicted. The drone footage didn't lie. The intake had taken a precision strike. No overpenetration, no explosion. Enough to stop the engine without alerting the escort team until well after it was too late. Rhodes let out a short breath through his nose. "You called that with no uplink. Just your range card." She didn't answer immediately. Then, it was already mapped. A younger operator at the back of the room murmured. She logged it, before anyone else even saw the canyon. They pulled her entry from the log again. The penciled grid was exact. The time matched. The detail matched. Even the wind shift had been marked to the decimal. The thermal screen flickered softly in the dim tent light. The vehicle sat silent, unchanged. The dust still hadn't settled around it. Cassie stood in the same posture she always held still, straight, calm. She didn't need them to say anything. She had already written it down. The tech looked back to the others. No need for a drone strike. It was already done yesterday. Rhodes nodded, slowly this time. Not to her, to the data. Cassie turned without being dismissed and walked back into the sunlight. No one followed. The room had thinned by the time the final overlay loaded, but the ones who remained were the ones who mattered. The second drone team had stayed behind after their shift ended, working through the shot trajectory with a forensic module usually reserved for post-strike analysis. Across the main table, the projection displayed a pale arc stitched across the canyon space, plotted from Cassie's firing position to the precise point of impact. It wasn't straight. It bent in a shallow crescent, bending first with wind pressure, then again with terrain contour. The round had skipped once not deflected, but guided through a low brush pocket before continuing into the engine intake. The software colored each segment by friction coefficient and speed retention. The arc flared yellow where the brush slowed the round just enough to steady it before entry. The round hadn't shattered. It had rotated clean, intact velocity, calibrated pressure, all of it on a single shot. A tech at the edge of the table folded his arms and exhaled slowly. That should have deflected. At that range, through brush, 9 out of 10 would tumble. A second operator spoke without looking away. Unless it was timed, she let the drag shape the arc, not forced, just followed. Another layer overlaid the arc environmental wind tracking at the time of fire. Wind speed confirmed at 3.4 meters per second from the west, verified against local field sensors. The arc tightened further. Cassie stood at the rear, arms folded, saying nothing. Her logbook was untouched on the bench beside her. The laminated range card she had used during setup still lay on the corner of the diagnostics rack, its penciled arcs mirroring what the software had just revealed. It wasn't perfect in appearance, but it was exact in substance. Every note aligned. Rhodes stood stiff near the front of the group, his shoulders tense, jaw set. He watched the replay 3 times. Not once did he speak. The officer who had joked the day before now stared down at the floor between cycles, lips thin, Fingers curled around the edge of the bench. The laughter from yesterday had evaporated. From the far side, a junior analyst leaned closer to the screen. He spoke softly, but his words carried, "That's not possible with current assist systems. Not that clean. Not without correction." A UAV tech responded without lifting his head, not with digital. He glanced toward Cassie, but with analog and wind. Maybe. Cassie didn't move. She didn't offer commentary. She had already written the math. A senior officer, one of the commanders brought in for evaluation, crossed his arms and said, "You don't just make that shot." Cassie looked at the screen, then back at him. "You don't try," she said. "You measure." That was it. No further elaboration, no adjustment in her tone, just the truth, delivered like a weather report. No one responded for a long time. The overlay looped again, slower this time, each movement rendered in colored vectors and degrees of tolerance. The round traced its final path and stopped in the engine core, where the vehicle had gone dead. One of the drone team captains walked around the table and picked up her laminated card. He studied it, glanced once toward the digital overlay, then nodded without looking at anyone. He set it back down carefully, in the same position. The air in the room had changed. The silence wasn't awkward. It wasn't empty. It was full of recalculation, of voices choosing not to speak because words would only weaken what had been seen. Rhodes stepped forward once, then paused. He looked at Cassie, then the logbook, then the frozen thermal still on the wall. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. He just nodded once. Cassie didn't return it. She didn't need to. Her record had done the work. Outside the tent, the wind picked up again, steady from the west. It brushed over canvas flaps and kicked dust through the gravel lines of the camp. No one commented on it, but Cassie turned her head slightly, watching how it moved. A small tick of adjustment, almost imperceptible. She saw it. She always did. The overlay continued to loop, and the room stayed quiet. Cassie woke early, though no alarm was set. The air was still, touched only by the early breeze that moved through the rows of tents like a whisper. She sat up without rush, rolled her bed with precision, and began breaking down her gear. Each motion followed the same cadence she always kept silent, steady, exact. Her rifle was already clean from the night before. She double-checked the bolt tension, inspected the barrel channel, then placed it inside the case with care that didn't look ceremonial but was. She folded her jacket tight, clipped her gloves to her pack strap, and placed her laminated range card on the cot for a moment before opening her logbook. The final entry was brief. Distance confirmed 1,100 meters, wind at 3.4 meters per second, impact intake, frontal quadrant, engine disabled. She didn't add commentary, no victory notes, no underlining, just the line. Then she slipped the mission card into the center of the book and closed it slowly. Someone had left a printout on her cot. She hadn't heard them approach. It was the thermal, still the image frozen at the moment of impact, intake blooming in sudden white before dropping to silence. No caption, no initials, just the image, waiting. She looked at it for a moment, then folded it once and placed it between the pages of the logbook. It didn't belong on a wall. It belonged in the record. Outside, the camp moved with the usual rhythm of morning routine. Rations clinked onto trays, power units kicked on, boots tracked dust between tents. But something in the current had shifted. She walked past the chow tent without stopping. Rhodes was standing at the door. He didn't speak. He didn't block her way. He just held the flap open. She nodded once. That was enough. Further along, a junior soldier who had laughed earlier now stood by the water station. He caught her eye for a second. This time, no smirk. Just a short nod, a shift in posture like someone who had seen something he didn't yet know how to carry. She nodded back and kept walking. At the vehicle line, the first transport truck waited, engine idling low. The others were still gathering gear and talking beside their crates. She didn't wait. She hoisted her pack over one shoulder, checked the straps once, then stepped up onto the rear bench of the transport and sat down. She didn't watch the camp as the driver climbed in. She didn't need to. The ones who had seen the data would talk. The image would be passed around. The telemetry would remain on file. Her log would be archived, time-stamped, cross-confirmed. The shot would outlast the memory of who took it. That was how these things worked. The truck began to move, tires crunching softly over gravel. From the platform behind the ops tent, someone said, not loudly. She bent the shot, through wind and foliage. Another voice answered, no. She bent time, made us wait to see what was already done. The truck turned down the ridge road, and the tent rows slid out of view behind a haze of kicked dust. Ahead, the sun had cleared the far ridgeline, low but unwavering. Inside the cab, the driver said nothing. Cassie didn't either. She rested one boot on the opposite bench, adjusted the strap on her case, and looked out toward the basin below. The wind shifted again, rising slightly over the crest. It caught the edge of the canvas over the rear frame, made it snap once like a flag. No one saw it from the camp, but Cassie did. She turned her head toward it, eyes narrowing slightly, then turned forward again. The road dropped away beneath them. She didn't look back. Some stories are loud. This one was not. Cassie never raised her voice, never asked to be believed. She measured the wind, trusted her craft, and let the silence do the rest. What others dismissed as outdated turned out to be exact. Her value wasn't in how she looked or how loudly she claimed her place. It was in the way she moved with purpose, acted with care, and walked away without needing applause. This was a story about quiet strength, about being overlooked and still showing up, about letting the truth catch up to the moment. Maybe it reminds you of someone. Maybe it reminds you of yourself. If it made you pause, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, stories that honor the ones who don't ask for attention but deserve it, follow along. We're just getting started.